their economy is taking a huge beating. I would not say Russia is in a greater position than Ukraine. I think Trump made a very strong statement, a statement which I'm sure has gotten Putin's attention in a favorable way. Uh, Whether or not economic sanctions can do the trick is a question, because Trump wants negotiations to start very soon. And Putin's aim is to try and persuade Trump to change some of the terms of his negotiation, because while Zelensky has shown a clear readiness to compromise, Putin has shown no readiness to compromise. So Putin would like to delay things out so his army can make additional gains. That's why Trump made that very strong statement to get Putin's attention to say, you can't do that.
We've had this rather cryptic response from a Russian ambassador saying that he wants to know what this deal might mean. Do you take that as an optimistic sign of how Russia might respond to all of this? Because it's certainly not the aggressive, bombastic rhetoric that we've had in the past.
I think Putin used bombastic rhetoric in the past because he felt he could intimidate Western leaders. And sadly, he was right about that. Trump's not about to be intimidated. That's one of his strengths, which could make a difference here. And so I think the statement was a temporizing one by a relatively junior official, just a placeholder as Putin decides what to do.
And Donald Trump, of course, has made it very clear that he wants this war to end. It's partly because he doesn't want to spend US funds and send military might over to Ukraine. He doesn't want to continue the level of support that Ukraine has been enjoying from President Biden. Do you think that there will be still concerns about that in Ukraine?
I think Ukraine was deeply frustrated by the timidity of the Biden administration in sending weapons. And so they welcomed, in a sense, although with some trepidation, Trump's win in the election. But it's true, as you point out, there are people in the Trump world who have no understanding that Russia is, in fact, a danger to American interests. And so they're willing to cut off aid. Trump, I think you correctly said, would prefer not to send American aid to Ukraine. But he hasn't ruled out that. He hasn't ruled out sending weapons. And I think the threats, not the threats, but the warnings he gave to Putin with this statement were meant to make him consider compromise. And if Putin doesn't consider compromise, then Trump, I think, will follow through. And he will consider additional steps to put pressure on Putin to negotiate a serious agreement, a good faith agreement.
And how do you think this intervention from Donald Trump so far, just a statement on his Truth Social platform, how is that going to be viewed in Ukraine, do you think?
I'm right now in Davos, and I'm seeing lots of Ukrainians. I think they've been encouraged by Trump's outburst today, and I use the word outburst carefully because it was meant to be tough and to get the attention of a party which right now would prefer war to peace.
And Ukraine has shifted its position on this, hasn't it? I mean, President Zelensky used to be totally opposed to any talk of a deal, partly because he recognises that any kind of agreement, any kind of negotiations to end the war will surely mean him having to sacrifice some of the territory that the Russians have seized.
That's correct. And Zelensky weeks ago signaled that while he doesn't particularly like it, he's ready for territorial compromise. The Russians have simply stated their willingness to talk to Trump and to talk abstractly about compromise, but they have belittled the terms that Trump's team has put out as the possible basis for negotiation.
And how much of this do you think will depend on the willingness of not just Ukraine's leaders, but the Russian leadership as well to find some sort of compromise? Because there is this big question, isn't there, over the extent of the territory that Russia has seized. And Donald Trump presumably will not want to end up with a deal that looks as though President Putin has won, that he's got that land that he's taken.
I think you're absolutely right. Trump has said that Ukraine's survival is important to the United States. Trump has said that he would not abandon Ukraine. And so he knows that any deal that he brokers has to have very clear provisions to make sure Ukraine is safe, secure, and economically viable as a result of this agreement. And those conditions for Ukraine are definitely is not something Putin wants to see. Zelensky is willing to compromise on territory if he can make sure that his country survives, is secure, and is economically viable. But that's precisely the sort of Ukraine Putin does not want to see.
And how does this all fit in with Donald Trump's approach to NATO? He was talking just a short time ago about the need for NATO countries to spend up to 5%. That would be a huge increase for many NATO members, including the UK. But do you think that Donald Trump is prepared to continue the US's leading role that it's currently playing in the NATO alliance?
We saw during Trump's first term rhetoric which raised questions about his support for NATO. But American policy towards NATO did not change. American leadership of NATO was never in question during his first term. So now he's saying things, again, which are raising questions about his commitment to NATO. I would see them as bargaining chips to get NATO allies to spend more on defense. You know, every American president since Ronald Reagan talked about NATO countries spending more on defense without any success. Trump's bluster and Trump's persistence achieved some real progress on that issue. And of course, Putin's wanton aggression in Ukraine with the big invasion was even more persuasive. But Trump did well in his first term and increasing our NATO allies' willingness to spend on defense. And I think we're seeing round two of that very same campaign.
Having seen what Russia has done with that illegal invasion of Ukraine and the numerous threats that President Putin has made since then, what do you think we should make of this news that a British submarine actually had to warn a Russian spy ship that was apparently loitering near vital undersea cables in British waters?
Well, I'm encouraged by the fact that the British Defense Forces took this serious measure. Since at least the spring, the Russians have begun a much more active campaign of sabotage. You know, they talk about the cutting of the communication cables in the Baltic Sea. In those past several months, the sabotage at defense plants in Germany, the possible attempted assassination of a major German businessman, and the West has not done enough to respond to this. So it's about time we begin to do this because Putin is trying to undermine NATO deterrence. That's very dangerous.
And when you look at that, that doesn't really suggest a Russia under President Putin who is in any way going to be prepared to back down and sacrifice too much of what he has achieved when it comes to these negotiations over Ukraine. Because in a sense, Russia's in a stronger position than Ukraine. Russia has been gaining territory, hasn't it?
It's been gaining territory at an extraordinary human cost and cost in materiel. And their economy is taking a huge beating. I would not say Russia is in a greater position than Ukraine. I believe strongly, and I can explain this, that if Western support for Ukraine were to continue as it had in the past, or better yet, became greater, Russia would lose this war. It would lose almost all the territory it's taken. But this is not a policy that Trump wants to pursue. And his policy could also achieve a stable peace as long as he makes sure that Ukraine has the means to deter future Russian aggression following any peace deal.
John Herbst, former US ambassador to Ukraine, now director of the Eurasia Centre at the Atlantic Council. Great to speak to you tonight. Thank you so much.